Welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chainy podcast. My name is Nathan Cheney, and today we are fortunate to have Abe, the CEO of ASCM, join us from Chicago. I've been seeing ASCM in the news, like all supply chain organizations and thought leaders, because supply chain is making headlines these days. And for example, they've just come out with their annual study of career and salary report data and some other things. So I'm excited to dig in, and not to mention that I'm going to go get to spend some time with ASCM folks at the Change conference coming up in Europe here shortly, and then later on in the fall here in the US. So maybe we'll dig into that a little bit too. So without further ado, I'll hand the digital microphone over to you, Abe, for a bit, and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
I appreciate it, Nathan. First, I appreciate you having me on today. And you couldn't be more right about the concept of supply chain. 4 or 5 years ago, we had a hard time telling our family and our friends that we actually had a job and it was called supply chain. And most of the responses, well, what kind of chains do you supply, Abe? And so at least we have an understanding of the term and we have a job that people recognize today. My journey into it was a little bit sideways, but I think that probably is where most of the individuals found themselves in supply chain today, especially the leadership, where we didn't have a formal curriculum for a lot of individuals in schools, academic, and we sort of back our way into this, either finance or engineering. Mine came really out of the nonprofit sector, as a matter of fact. My early career was in finance. I'm a recovering CPA. I earned my degree a number of years ago, but really never jumped into the audit work. Most of my work was within philanthropic, government, and education or associations. The common denominator was non-defined ownership. We didn't have LLCs or stockholders or any partners. We reported to a board of directors that had fiduciary responsibility, whether in academic or in government or in associations or foundations. And that's where most of my work came through. I spent a number of years at the American College of Healthcare Executives, where I really cut my teeth with my mentor, Tom Dolan, who really has been a guide for me in terms of the association marketplace. And then I spent some years with American Express as managing director for their consulting practice. And again, our focus was on that cohort of non-defined ownership organizations, schools, government organizations. And so my transition into not only APICS back at that time was a turnaround. Most of the work that we did was turnaround, and I got hired to turn APICS around. This was an organization that was sort of floundering back when I joined them in 2006, which seems like decades ago relative to supply chain. The organization really lost its way in terms of the global nature of supply chain, which is really interesting when you juxtapose it to today's environment and a lot of the rhetoric about reshoring and, reshoring American, manufacturing. Back then, there still was a board that was focused on manufacturing's coming back to the United States. And this is back in 2006, 2007, where we have seen the impact of outsourcing and low-cost labor across the globe, but yet there was a significant effort within APICS to bring manufacturing back. But I think we lost our way back then, and I think in a lot of respects, we missed the opportunity of the global nature of supply chain and the impact that sourcing and manufacturing and low-cost labor and logistics had on our industry. And I think it was a reset opportunity. I came in as a turnaround guy for APICS. I stayed because the people, the passion that supply chain professionals have for their jobs and for their companies and to make a difference. I can't think of a better opportunity than to be in an organization in an industry that wants to make a difference in people's lives. And that's what supply chain professionals do.
I like it. I like I came here for a little while and then I stayed and I stayed and I stayed and bought into it, right? That always makes for a good story. As well as I appreciate your commentary about many of the leaders in supply chain today didn't go to school for supply chain and logistics, that it's a little bit of a newer age concept of specializing it in school and making a career out of it from day one.
Really interesting because it's almost, we're bifurcated right now on the leadership, predominantly finance and engineering. White male industries back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you tended to not see a lot of diversity come out of that cohort. And yet, when you take a look at the diversity today coming out of schools right now, it
Mhm.
is, not only gender wise, but the skills that these individuals have are extraordinary. These are digital natives. They have always worked with technology, and yet a lot of the leadership didn't. And so there's opportunities for reverse mentoring from the individuals coming into the workforce about the impact of technology, especially with AI and a lot of the discussion today.
Let's maybe step back before we kind of dig into more industry concepts. Into I see looking here, you've spent most of your career in Chicago. Is that where you're from, or kind of like can you walk us back through time a little bit more and tell us about Abe the younger?
Yeah, I grew up in Chicago. I am a product of the Chicago public school system, proudly. The the family itself is all over the globe. Most of my family is either in the UK or in Israel.
Mhm.
My brother and my sister and my parents are really the only ones that are in the States right now. I have a much broader family than just mostly in the States. Growing up in Chicago, I have an affinity for it, and I also have a hate for it. And you can guess which time of the year I love and which time of the year I hate. Coming out of school, it was finance. That came easy to me. It wasn't that I had a proclivity to finance. It was one of those topics that I didn't struggle with in
Yeah,
school. So,
yeah.
sort of the path of least resistance. Coming into the job, it was interesting because coming into audit work, what I realized is that auditors are great at what they do, but they're history tellers. They tell you what occurred. I
Mhm.
wanted to be on the history making side. I wanted to create history, and I think this is where I really learned that the CFO, a transformational CFO, can really make a difference in an organization as opposed to always looking in the rear view mirror, but looking forward and helping the company make the appropriate decisions about how to better position the organization, how to greater efficiencies, greater effectiveness for the employees. That's what's really driving me, is to make a difference. And I've been fortunate to be surrounded by some of the most extraordinary talents in the world, and they make me look a lot better than I am.
What about who are you outside of work? Hobbies. What do you do to keep yourself busy when you're not making supply chains better?
I am a frustrated golfer.
All
That's
right.
I get my sort of my Zen moments on the golf course.
Hmm.
Other than that, just trying to stay in shape like everybody else right now. It's trying to find time for personal focus is a challenge these days.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's balancing life and work and professional responsibilities and everything. Especially I think in this day and age when there's so many distractions digitally, everything's competing for your attention and your time. Any words of advice for folks as they kind of take on leadership responsibilities and it's in today's day and age, it's a different set of tools and distractions and obstacles that we have.
Yeah, that's interesting, and even to juxtapose it within the supply chain careers for a lot of individuals, functional expertise used to be enough. If you had the technical expertise, that was more than sufficient. Whether you were in logistics or planning or inventory management, you know, organizations were looking for those SMEs, those functional experts. Today, that's the price of entry into supply chain. You need to have that foundation, but now it's much more focused on collaboration, it's on communication, it's on coordination among organizations, and not only within your company, but your suppliers and your vendors and your tier two, tier three. And this is where, as an industry, we have a little bit of ways to go in terms of our not only the visibility, but the transparency and traceability of our supply chains. And it's been a significant journey for a lot of individuals in terms of coming into supply chain. And I think this is one of the areas, and our salary survey does demonstrate this. Individuals are staying and they're seeing greater opportunities, but yet we've got a little bit of ways to go in terms of the individuals using their voice. For years, we advocated, and Nathan, I'm sure you can remember that, even finding a chief supply chain officer within an organization was a unicorn, that there weren't a whole lot of these individuals.
Mhm.
And yet we're starting to see a proliferation, a commitment to, as you shared before, supply chain knows everything that goes on in the company. That's
Yeah.
one of two functions: finance and supply chain. They have to know everything that goes on in the company. But yet, when we saw the transition into the leadership for organizations, more often than not, it was out of finance or out of
Yeah.
sales or out of marketing. I think the days of the chief supply chain officer not only are here, but we have to, enable these individuals to use their voice. We now have a seat at the table. Now we have to use our voice at the seat at the table to enable organizations to be much more sustainable, to be much more accountable for what they do.
I again I hear that echoed so often through so many conversations with leaders in the industry about how supply chain is getting that seat at the table more and more often. And I feel like if we were to plot, along with crisis, economic crisis, and healthcare crisis in the world, with COVID, and today with sort of the tariffs and this stuff, like supply chain is, if you were to plot how many times it's Googled or something like that, you'd probably see this hockey stick effect going on, right? That's
When
yeah.
you take a look at it, I mean, these were the problem solvers. The only time that you got called upon when an order didn't arrive or your inventory was off, or these were the problem solvers. Well, I think we got enough problems, and that's why these people are where they are today. Is that whether you're taking the geopolitical, environmental, or the Houthis, or the Red Sea, or the Suez Canal, or the
Yeah.
Panama Canal, we've got enough problems. And who do you want to take care of this? The problem solvers, supply
Mhm.
chain professionals.
Yes, exactly. Let's take, you talked a little bit about like the path and the journey of people in the industry. Maybe let's look at that and zoom out to maybe the 20,000 foot view and talk. Can you talk a little bit about the journey of ASCM
Yeah.
over the years, and how I feel like it seems like it's kind of capitalizing on this movement toward a broader supply chain perspective in business, and not being such a functional expert, as you mentioned a while ago.
Yeah, really interesting point, because I think it mirrors a lot of the industry. And let's go back to the 70s and 80s when technology was starting to become a significant part of organizational, sort of strategy, and that is being, data enabled as opposed to a lot of dependency on spreadsheets. Although I think most of we could walk into almost any organization and still see Excel spreadsheets on a lot of desks right now. But if we go back, in terms of the transition, in terms of the commitment, the organization is 70, almost 70 years old. And if you go back to the 60s and 70s, the term even supply chain was not within the vocabulary. It was ops management or industrial design, or, a lot of internal focus on within the four walls of the organization, inventory management, cost control. And then we started to see, with China opening up in the 60s, in the 70s and 80s, we saw a very different dynamic in terms of sourcing and low cost labor. Um, Very effective financially. I think we missed an opportunity to re-educate and retrain a lot of employees in a lot of cities and regions across the United States where we had significant manufacturing and it was outsourced overseas. We didn't provide a safety net for these individuals, and we left a lot of individuals cold relative to the transition to a global supply chain. Financially, it was a boom. And we saw it in terms of availability of consumer goods, rapid implementation of delivery and logistics, a huge transformation in terms of availability and bringing costs down of getting stuff across the globe. And so the organization really started to mirror where supply chain was going, but yet we started to see a schism back in the 70s and 80s and 90s in terms of what does manufacturing look like in the United States versus the rest of the world. And where we're seeing low cost labor, where we're seeing a significant arbitrage on logistics, provide that consumer, benefit of low cost products, high availability. And then you started to see what technology did back in the 90s and the 2000s. And companies started to see that integrating their supply chain activities was much more effective than the silo effect that you and I probably, grew up with in the 80s and 90s, where you had your planners, and then you had your manufacturing guys, you had your warehousing people. As long as I did my job, I'm fine. I don't care what happened before and after. Well, as we started to see supply chains become much more integrated from beginning to end, organizations started to see the real value of integrated supply chains. And this is where, interestingly, when I joined the organization, I called the CEO of CSCMP, Rick, back in the day. I called the CEO of ISM, Paul Novak, back in the day. And I got them together and I said to them, look, as associations, we represent the entire industry. Companies don't look at us the way that they view their supply chain. They view their supply chain as an integrated activity. And yet we're forcing them to pick the procurement people for ISM, the planning guys for APICS, the logistics guys for CSCMP. That's not the way that organizations viewed supply chains. It was an integrated activity. And my point to them was, look, we need to respond to the way the companies view their supply chains, not the way that we've historically looked at them. Um, we discussed mergers with those organizations. As a matter of fact, we attempted to merge with ISM on 3 separate occasions, and
Wow.
their board voted it down for a variety of reasons. But I think we endeavored to be back in 08, 09, end to end, to reflect the way that organizations view their supply chains as opposed to the way associations view their supply chains. And so APICS as an organization was a focus on the individual, on that supply chain professional, that man or woman in the back office doing all the things necessary. And we thought that was enough, Nathan. If I educated all the people that I could ever touch and they became members, that was our holy grail. We solved our problem. And then I asked the simple question, so what? Why educate people? What's the value of educating people? Well, organizational performance. Well, okay, let's trace them through their organizational performance. Our job then is to indicate, okay, if we train individuals, you will get better performance in your company. And we thought that was it. If I could train everybody and I could prove that they're improving their organizational performance, we've solved our holy grail. I have achieved what we needed to do for our mission and our vision. And then we realized that we had one more step, and that was the consumer. And that is that we need to ensure that the consumer understands what they are buying, how did it get there, and what's included in their products. And so we've taken on the responsibility of our vision statement, a better world through supply chain. And that is that we believe that we can make a difference in people and patients' lives through supply chain and through the activities that organizations are doing to get products into the consumers and the patients' hands in a reasonable time frame at a reasonable cost and without damaging the planet. And that's where we've evolved. So we started off with the supply chain professional, and then we moved to the organization, the making sure that we can assess their performance, and that led us to the merger with Supply Chain Council. And so the SCORE framework. So to represent companies, we enabled ourselves through the merger with Supply Chain Council. And so we thought that, okay, I can train them, I can prove that their organizations are effective. The last step was, are we addressing the consumer and the patient as well as the environmental and the global nature of supply chain?
Wow. Thank you for walking me through that. I've not had, the luxury of being in a position to hear that from A to Z. So, there was a point in that story where you talked about the challenges of offshoring and outsourcing and jobs and manufacturing jobs leaving the country. And we're talking about that a lot these days as well. But I feel like we're also talking about how AI and automation is a threat of sorts in a little bit of what we do. And I would be interested because you kind of mentioned that maybe the industry and maybe associations, maybe the education and academia institutions dropped to the ball on what do we do with all these folks that were previously part of the manufacturing ecosystem here in the US, and what have we done for them since? And now I'm starting to ask people that I come across that I think have a valuable opinion on this is whose responsibility is it now for this upcoming sort of industry 4.0 wave of automation and AI? Is it government? Is it academia? Is it individual professions? Is it the companies themselves that kind of have the onus on them to prepare the workforce for the next move forward in how things are made and distributed in the world?
I think there has to be a joint effort. I don't think you can put it on academia. I don't think you can put it on the government or private enterprises. And I think that's part of the challenge is that we really haven't realigned our talent strategy as we have with our technology strategy. You go into any organization right now and you can almost get any amount of investment on technology. Talk to them about AI, blockchain, the predictive analytics, any transformation. You're going to get an audience. Okay, what do we need to do? Talk to them about talent. Talk to them about workforce and upskilling their leadership and where is their leadership development. Is we'll get to that. And so we have an environment where, because of the gaps that were identified through the pandemic, specifically the visibility, We did not have true visibility into our tier 2, tier 3, and beyond, our vendors and our partners, and where most of the disruption occurred, not in our tier 1, highly financed, well leveraged organizations. It was in the smaller and medium sized organizations down the line. So today, there isn't a supply chain professional that can walk into the C suite and say, I don't know who or what is in my supply chain. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we now know who and what is in our supply chains. And what we're finding is that maybe we're not as sustainable, we're not as ethical, and maybe we're not as responsible as we should be. And this now, it comes back to okay, how do you ensure that you are getting the appropriate information, relevant, timely, accurate information from your partners? Well, we're not going to do it through via phone calls. The human element is just impossible to try to get that kind of information. So the push towards that digital transformation in connecting everybody in your ecosystem, your partners, all your, the raw materials and your vendors, which now brings in other dynamics. And as you were talking about the role responsibility of the supply chain professional, it now opens up to compliance, because what we're opening up is risk with cybersecurity and ransomware when we extend the transformation into organizations, specifically a small and medium sized, that don't have the resources, don't have the same security protocols, and they don't have the talent necessary to align their same security protocols as you do. And so we're exposing a significant portion of the organization to a lot of cyber risk. So now we're adding that on to the responsibility of the supply chain professional. Okay, that wasn't part of our role 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Now it is. Now, sustainability. In a lot of respects, chief sustainability officers are like chief supply chain officers about 10 to 15 years ago. It's hard to find those individuals. And if you do find them, where do they report up to? More often than not, it's legal, because they have compliance issues. And so now this is part of the supply chain responsibility, is sustainability and compliance, as well as cybersecurity. So the talent necessary and the role of these individuals are true superheroes. Extraordinary competency, not only in strategic implementation of your overall supply chain strategy, but the actual application of it and the implementation of it through your partners and your talent. This is an extraordinarily dynamic environment today, especially with the digital transformation and AI, and organizations trying to mitigate their risk as much as possible. This is when you need true leadership that can see through all the smoke and plot a strategy out for their organizations. This is where talent and leadership is a significant gap for us right now within the industry.
I see. That's actually, I think, a great segue into a recent, your annual study on careers and salaries and stuff in the industry. And as you just kind of mentioned, that the complexity and the number of hats and things that your supply chain leader has to wear, how has that been reflected in pay and career progressions and amongst the different sort of groups that we have out there in the workforce for supply chain?
Yeah, well, the good news is the companies are recognizing the contributions that these individuals are making. That's the really positive news. In terms of compensation, it's extraordinarily competitive right now. Median salary is $100,000. That's up almost 50% over the past 5 to 10 years, where it was about $77,000. Now it's $103,000. The job market, individuals coming out of school, multiple job offers, second only to engineers right now, and starting salary second to only engineers right now. But I think it's the next sort of data points that are always relevant to us, and that is, once they come into the industry, are they staying? Are they seeing that their contributions are consistent, with the rewards that they're getting and the recognition that they're getting? And I think this is where we're starting to see organizations really recognize the supply chain talent, and that is, over 80% of the individuals plan to stay with their companies. That's extraordinary given the amount of turmoil that we're seeing right now within supply chain. These individuals are not leaving their companies right now. More often than not, the skill sets that they have, they're recognized for their blend of technical and interpersonal experiences. And so again, we're seeing that technical experiences are important, but we're seeing much more on the leadership and the interpersonal skills for them to, contribute to their organizations. I would be remiss if I didn't share that our certifications, if individuals do have our certifications, the salary premium is 20 to 30% over non-certified individuals. That's pretty substantial when you're talking about a medium salary between $80 and $100,000. These individuals are being recognized. It's also interesting when I go to a lot of schools and I share this information. The students' eyes light up and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting my certification. I'm going to get my salary." And then I have to tell them, I said, "You know what? I'm all about you getting your certification, but contribute to your company. That's how you get the recognition, not just because you get the certification. It means you're capable, but when you implement, that's when you're recognized for the organization." And I think that's part of the commitment that these individuals have. Not only is it competitive, but they're recognized and they're given opportunities for leadership. A couple of interesting points, though. For the third year in a row, women starting in supply chain are out earning their male counterparts, which is very positive. That means that organizations are recognizing that they need to step up their recruitment of women and diversity within their workforce.
Mhm.
The challenge is that the longer they stay within the industry, the pay gap inverts. That men out earn the women the longer they stay in the industry. Variety of reasons. Number one, job opportunities may not be consistent in terms of availability for women as they do for men. Leadership opportunities. They may not be given the same job role and responsibilities or asked to take on additional work efforts. Um, we see that this is an opportunity to not only recognize the contribution that individuals make, but to do it consistently across their enterprise. Again, the salary report is consistent in terms of what we've seen over the past. This is the seventh year we've done it, and we're starting to see consistency in terms of the satisfaction that individuals have, the recognition that they have. But I think the skill sets are what we're seeing changing over the past 3 to 5 years, significantly more on collaboration, communication, interpersonal skills as opposed to the technical.
I think that kind of parallels the concept that logistics and supply chain was typically, previously just the transportation department,
Yeah.
right? And all you really needed to know was how to get a truck from your side of town to the other side of town, and that was about it. It was pretty simple. But now you've got to be able to encompass what tsunami is hitting in Southeast Asia today, and how is that going to affect me a month from now when these ships start hitting? Like, it's such a much bigger problem, supply chain to solve today. And so the skills and maybe those soft skills and not being an expert in one bucket, but being able to work across all departments in the company to make things happen. It's great to hear that's being recognized and seen, and maybe it took the toilet paper shortage of the world in order to really bring it to the forefront. We've talked a little about students, we've talked a little about degree programs, and you've talked a little about going to colleges and speaking. Can you kind of give any, what's your main line of advice that you give to students that are studying supply chain today and want to go into the field?
First, I think one of the challenges that we had, and it's interesting that we talked about the history of APICS and ISM and CSCMP. When I joined the organization, I looked at the other organizations, specifically ISM and CSCMP, and I was envious of them. They knew exactly who their future member was. They knew the logistics person. They knew that buyer, and there was a clear path for those individuals into the leadership roles, whether in logistics or in procurement. And then I looked at us and I said, "Oh my gosh," I said, "we don't have a defined career path. You can come in through procurement, you can come in through logistics, warehousing, the distribution, a variety of different ways. And yet I couldn't give you one career path." And I saw that as a real detriment. And then I realized, wait a second here, we got the entire world available to us, where ISM and CSCMP have one channel, and that is either the procurement people or the logistics people. I can get the rest of the world. And that is our focus in terms of the capabilities. I knew what it takes to become a CFO. I knew my internal audit requirements. I knew all the experiences I needed to become a CFO. If I asked a CSCO today, how did you become a CSCO and what was your career path? It would be as varied as the individuals that we're talking to. And that is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity because of the skill sets and the experiences that these individuals develop in true leadership, that they get an exposure to almost every aspect of supply chain. And those of us within supply chain know that these are significantly different skills when you're talking about logistics, and when you're talking about planning horizons, or when you're talking about sustainability and cybersecurity. These are extraordinary skill sets that we expect the individuals to develop over time, and to be able to not only align all these resources, but to be able to lead the organization as well. And so the students coming in right now, and explaining to them, look, you have a world of opportunity in front of you, not just one career path. And that is, you find the area that you believe that you can make a difference in, and then expand your scope. Go beyond that and learn the other activities. And I think this is one of the things that really supports our certifications. For example, our CPIM, our Certified Planning and Inventory Management, I'd like to explain it like it's about a mile wide and 10 miles deep. It is meant to make you a subject matter expert. Whereas our CSCP, our Chief Supply Chain, our supply chain professional, or certified supply chain professional, it's meant to be a mile deep and 10 miles wide, to give you an aspect of every activity within supply chain, but not a subject matter expert in all of them. And that's what we're looking for, is those athletes. Oftentimes I use the metaphor, we're not trying to build a baseball team where I have a left fielder, center fielder, and right fielder. We're building coaches. And that is individuals that know all the activities and coordinate and orchestrate the talent that they have to achieve a better outcome. And so for students, I think this is an extraordinary opportunity to get into an industry that has the diversity that it has and the job opportunities that it has. Sometimes it's difficult to explain to them how to become a CSCO because of the career path being so varied. But for those individuals that are, more inclined to have diverse skill sets and not just a functional expert, sort of role responsibility, that's the true supply chain professional of the future.
For sure. And the fact that organizations are kind of picking up on that, and kind of figuring out how to incorporate that into their HR, strategies and plans and whatnot for how they grow their organization is great. And it sounds to me like the kinds of conversations that the ASCM is having and other leaders and thought leaders of the world are probably helping to move the needle on that a little bit. Speaking of organizations, I believe that also ASCM recently came out with a top 10 list of trends, critical and top of mind for organizations. You care to share a little bit about what y'all found through that study?
Yeah, it's interesting because we've done this now for a number of years in terms of, what are the areas that you're focused on as an organization that really make your, that are going to change the trajectory of the organization. And the changes that we've seen over the past couple of years, specifically since the pandemic, a tremendous amount of focus on the technology. And not surprisingly, the top four topics within the trends are all technology focused: artificial intelligence, global trade and geopolitical, big data and analytics, cybersecurity. Then comes agility and resiliency. And one of the areas that we're a little bit concerned about is the workforce evolution. With the amount of effort and resources that they're spending right now on technology, we want to ensure that you have the right individuals with the right skill sets to understand the data coming in and coming out of the systems. There was a study done a number of years ago in terms of the skill sets that the individuals are coming out of schools with, and what are the skill sets that organizations are looking for. Where's the mix? Where's the match and where's the miss for those individuals? Interestingly, we're overweighted on technology and analytics, indicating that the technology is much more powerful than we're using it right now. And there's an over reliance on analytics that just tell me what the data says and we'll go with it. Where we're underweighted is a little bit more of a concern, because the combination of the two will show you that this is a dangerous time. And that is critical thinking and real world experience. And so if you don't have individuals that can problem solve and critically evaluate the information coming in and coming out of the systems, and you have systems that are much more powerful than you're using them, it's a bad mismatch between the technology and the people. And this is where we need to invest in the individuals to have not only the context of the data coming in, but to use AI appropriately and to be able to leverage AI. In today's environment, in some cases, it's like handing the keys to an F1 car to a 16-year-old and say, okay, go ahead and see what you can do with this. We know what they're going to do with it. It's going to crash. you need to have individuals that have the experience, that have the knowledge, and have the real world experience to leverage the technology and the data. And
Mhm.
this is where we'd like to see a better match between employee development and the resources that they have to really leverage that investment.
You touched on something there, two things you touched on that are great jump off points here. One is you mentioned how that, and I remember it 5, 10 years ago, there was this really big emphasis on big data and a lot of folks focusing on data analytics as
Yeah,
a major.
yeah,
And I think that what we've just seen, and you just put a flashlight on it right now, is that quite quickly we figured out how to use AI to crunch numbers and data real quickly and do the analysis. And now the next step in that sort of naturally is what do you do with that data? And
yeah,
now that's where the emphasis needs to be, right? Is
exactly.
the hard work of analyzing it. Now we figured out how to solve that one. Now how do you solve what to do and leverage that information, right?
That talent side is a real challenge right now because, as I indicated before, you have digital natives coming into organizations. They're very comfortable using technology. They don't hesitate.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
yet you have a lot of leadership that still has the Excel spreadsheet and says, you know what, you do your
yeah,
fancy reports over there. I know what I'm going to use for my forecasts and for my planning horizons. And
yeah.
that is, sort of the mismatch. And they're both dangerous. Again, giving that, Ferrari or that F1 car to a 16-year-old is as bad as the leadership saying, you know what, you do whatever you need to do on AI. I'm going to trust my Excel spreadsheet.
Right,
Those are
right.
very bad dynamics on either side.
One last one. A word that you used earlier is change. You mentioned that the change over time, and it reminded me that I believe that's the word that y'all kind of used to describe your new annual conferences and something to that effect.
Yeah, that really interesting because one of the things that we recognized over time is that we were a membership organization. We had 50,000 members across the globe. So, not an insignificant cohort of individuals, but it was also the transformation that these individuals are going through. And we wanted to try to have an experience that reflected the lives that these individuals are living today. And more importantly, what they can expect.
As we wrap up today this discussion, Abe, any last thoughts that you would like to kind of leave listeners with before we part?
I think one of the things that we've seen over the past 3 to 5 years is that supply chain has become ubiquitous. It's thrown around at the kitchen table as it is at the boardroom table. I think there needs to be a better understanding of the global nature of supply chains and how we got here. We did not get here by accident. This was a intentional design to address consumer expectations, efficiency, financial, expectations for organizations, and we've been successful at it. We did not get here by accident. That the design of our global supply chains. I think what's challenging a lot of individuals and organizations right now is what does global supply chain look like in the future? Especially with regionalization and reshoring and a lot of focus on remanufacturing or on bringing manufacturing back to, you pick it, whether we're talking about North America or we're talking about the US. I think there are implications that we can learn from the past about how we transitioned away from a lot of the manufacturing in the United States, and we left a lot of swaths of our, great nation
Yeah.
unemployed. I think we may be at risk of doing the same thing as we consider reshoring and nearshoring in other, industries for, again, financial as well as employment purposes.
Mhm.
We need to ensure that we provide safety nets, we provide retraining. Otherwise, we end up in the same situation we created, and that is leaving individuals without a lot of options.
Yeah.
I think we can be much more informed about the impact of decisions and finding ways to provide for the consumer and the patients reasonable products at a reasonable cost and a reasonable time frame in terms of delivery. Most individuals' understanding of supply chain today is, I ordered it. Why isn't it here? And without an understanding of all the activities and all the things that have to go right to get that product into your doorstep and into your refrigerator every day.
I see. I see. Well, thanks for joining and sharing some of your experience and your expertise and your insights on supply chain, where it's been, where it is today, and where it's heading in the future. Hopefully, you enjoy your upcoming summer there in Chicago as you kind of exit wintertime, and looking forward to seeing you in the near future.
I appreciate it, Nathan. All the best.